Our Bible word is Zechariah 2 verse 10. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, says the Lord. So, before we dwell on this passage, let's first look at the context of Zechariah. Now, Zechariah himself, he was from a priestly family, so that means he himself was a priest. And the name of Zechariah means God remembered. And he was a very important figure in Jerusalem. And this was just after the period that the exile ended. So it was after 539 BC. He began his prophetic ministry in 520 BC while he was still a young man. And that we can read in Zechariah 2 verses 4. And Zechariah, like Haggai, another prophet, he was enthusiastic for the rebuilding of the temple. And because at the time of Zechariah and Haggai, the foundations were laid for the temple, but the temple wasn't built further, it wasn't completed. And there was also no priests worthy to officiate in the temple. So the people were disheartened. Why is our temple not there? Where are the priests? Because we were promised restoration. We've now returned from exile, and we are still here after all these years, and the temple hasn't been rebuilt, etc. And Haggai, he was a prophet who encouraged the people, to let's now work on this temple further. And Zechariah then came after him and encouraged the completion for the rebuilding of the temple. If we look further into the historical context of this time period, like I said, this was after the time of the Babylonian exile that ended in 539 BC. And of course, the Babylonians, they had an empire, and then the Persian kings, like Cyrus, he came along and they defeated the Babylonians. And in 538 BC, Cyrus, he gave an edict that allowed the temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And that we can also go read there in Ezra. And first of all, there was Sheshbazzar. He was the first provincial governor appointed by the Persians. And he attempted to rebuild this temple, but without success. But then the Persians appointed the second governor, that's Zerubbabel. That was in 520 BC. And also interestingly, he was actually a descendant of David's royal household. And Governor Zerubbabel, he was also supported by Joshua, the high priest. And so under their time period, the economic situation, etc., improved somewhat, and they initiated the building of the completion of the temple. And of course, there also to help along were the two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. And Haggai, he made his first speech on 29 August 520. And then clearing up work began 24 days later. And on 18 December 520 BC, the foundation stone was ceremoniously laid. And Haggai, he addressed the people. And after that, we don't hear anything about him. But Haggai, he encouraged now, okay, the foundation stones are there, let's work now. And he gave the speech in 520 BC, also when this foundation stone was laid. Then after him, Zechariah came, and he continued this proclamation. Let's build the temple. And the first 8 chapters are significant here. And because it actually consists of 3 central messages that Zechariah gave. And the first message, that can actually be dated, dates to about October, November 520 BC. He gave a second message, which can be dated to 15 February in 519 BC. And then the third message he gave in the 4th year of the reign of that king at that time, that we can date it to 7 December 518 BC. And Zechariah, he sees the second governor now, Zerubbabel, that he will become a worldwide ruler. And of course, Zerubbabel, his name actually means branch of Babylon. But Zechariah sees him that he will be the future ruler of the world. And also that the high priest, Joshua, will be made equal in rank with him. So he sees a future time period when there will be these two main figures who will have universal rule, so to speak. Zerubbabel, he will become like a king, and then assisted by Joshua, the high priest. So Zechariah and Haggai, their principal mission was successful because they encouraged the rebuilding of the temple, and that was achieved successfully. The temple was eventually rebuilt and consecrated in 515 BC. So the mission of Zechariah and Haggai was successful. The other portions of Zechariah's prophecy, however, that did not happen, because they saw that this temple, or Zechariah specifically saw that this temple being rebuilt, it would be the center of worldwide salvation. And there's Zerubbabel, he will be king, and Joshua will be the high priest, and they will be in charge of a worldwide order of peace and security. And Zechariah also criticized Cyrus because for political instability, for warfare, and he said his reign won't last much longer, but that also did not come to pass. Cyrus remained. Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest, they did not acquire this or get this universal rule and this order of peace. But what is significant of Zechariah is his worldwide vision of salvation. For him, it's not just about Israel. It's all peoples will eventually come to Jerusalem, and they will come and worship God at Jerusalem. And it will be all-inclusive. And here we find the seeds of the language we find in the New Testament. Because there Jesus, he's the true king. And he's also the high priest. And he will establish this worldwide order of peace. This new Jerusalem people will flock to, as we also read at the end of the book of Revelation. And this new Jerusalem that will descend from above, this worldwide pilgrimage, an order of peace and righteousness, it will be established. So, but here in Zechariah, it's there, but it refers to something else. So we see how that message here of the prophet Zechariah was also developed in the New Testament. So it does not refer to Jerusalem, the city itself, but there's a new Jerusalem that will come from above that will replace the existing order. But that's Zechariah, and that's Haggai. It was about, let's build a temple, let's finish it, let's complete this work. And eventually the temple was completed and consecrated in 515 BC. So our Bible word comes from the second message that the prophet delivered. But if you look at our broader historical or broader textual context, it's from chapters 1 verses 7 to 6 verses 15. That's visions of a bright future. And here it consists of a series of 8 night visions that the prophet had. And yeah, he interacts with angels who also interpret the symbolism for him. And the visions that we encounter here, it depicts the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the growth of the post-exilic community, the restoration of a royal and priestly rulers, and the spiritual cleansing of the land. And our immediate textual unit is chapter 2, verses 1 to 13. That is the third vision of those 8 night visions. It's a man with a measuring line. So here the prophet, he sees a man with a measuring line. And he's about to measure the extent of Jerusalem, because the idea is to rebuild the city walls. Remember, this is the post-exilic community. Some people have returned from Babylon. Remember that Zechariah was this prophet who came to spur the people on to complete the temple. And of course, part of that's also the rebuilding of Jerusalem as a city. So he sees in this vision a man with a measuring line because the walls need to be rebuilt. And then another angel comes and actually says, no, stop this man, because it's not necessary. Because the city is going to explode in population with people and livestock. The walls that he wants to build won't be big enough to contain everything. Because also God, himself, he will be the guardian of the city. So if we go to verse 1, it says, then I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. So in other words, he wants to measure the extent of Jerusalem, because the city walls must be rebuilt. So I said, where are you going? And he said to me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is its width and what is its length. So there was another angel who came and said, run, speak to this young man, saying, Jerusalem shall be inhabited as towns without walls, because of the multitude of men and livestock in it. In other words, the population will become so big, whatever walls you built, the city won't be big enough to contain everything. And now the prophet addresses those who are still caught in Babylonian exile, encouraging them to come to Jerusalem. It says, up, up, flee from the land of the north, says the Lord. For I have spread you abroad like the four winds of heaven, says the Lord. Up, Zion, escape, you who dwell with the daughter of Babylon. So this is encouragement to the exiles who are still left in Babylon and scattered all over there. Come back to Jerusalem. Because this imagery is the restoration of Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be made great. It will have a great population. Then God, through the prophet, also says that, well, those who ill-treated you, they will also be ill-treated, because you're the apple of my eye. And then we come to our Bible word. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, says the Lord. So this is part of the restoration of Jerusalem. God, symbolically speaking, he will return to Jerusalem. He will again take up his residence there, because previously God has departed, and then the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in roughly 587 BC. And part of this restoration of Jerusalem is that many nations or multitudes will come to Jerusalem as a place of pilgrimage. There will be this universal pilgrimage of people. If you go read there in verse 11, many nations shall be joined to the Lord in that day, and they shall become my people, and I will dwell in your midst. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. So here God also speaks, he will take possession of Jerusalem and Judah. And so in other words, Jerusalem will receive special prominence. Many nations will come to Jerusalem as a place of pilgrimage. And then this pericope ends where there's this hush, there's this silent awe in terms of what God is going to do. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, for he's aroused from his holy habitation. So the unique feature of Zechariah, to mention it again, is that this idea of universal pilgrimage to Jerusalem. This idea also comes again later on in chapter 8. If we go to verses 20 to 23. Thus says the Lord of hosts, people shall yet come, inhabitants of many cities. The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, let us continue to go and pray before the Lord, and seek the Lord of hosts. I myself will go also. Yes, many peoples and strong nations shall come to seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem, and to pray before the Lord. So this idea of universal pilgrimage is quite unique to Zechariah. And it's also an idea taken up in the New Testament, where Jerusalem, that symbolizes God's people, the people whom as God has redeemed at the end time, It's also the New Testament speaks of the heavenly Jerusalem, where people will come to it. So the seeds of this idea of this universal pilgrimage to Jerusalem from many nations, it has its seeds here in Zechariah. So it's a very prominent theme from Zechariah that's also developed in the New Testament. So our immediate vision here is about Jerusalem's restoration. Don't bother building new cities. The inhabitants are going to become too many. God himself will be this guardian, this wall of fire around the city, and he will come to Jerusalem. He will make his habitation there again. And so the exiles are also invited, come back to Jerusalem. Because that's also one of the main symbolisms in the New Testament, that the redemption that we have in Jesus is also this return from exile, going back to our true home, which is the New Jerusalem.